Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm so glad you're here with us. Hallelujah. I'm going to read the book of Numbers. You ready? All right. Now, I might skip a few portions because it's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of names. And I don't want to take up your whole day just reading one book. But it needs to be read. It needs to be understood and just dive into it sometime. So here we go. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. And Yahweh spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. And that right there is why this book is called In the Wilderness. That's right. Bimidbar, if that's how you pronounce it, I could be wrong. Bimidbar means in the wilderness. Isn't that cool? The book of Numbers is actually a different title given by the scribes that translated these things into different languages. But this book was actually called Bimidbar, which means in the wilderness. I much prefer that. It brings a greater meaning than Numbers. Sure, yeah, it has a lot of numbers in it. But there's so much more to the book of Numbers. A lot more. In fact, there's a lot of instruction that's given in the book of Numbers that is beneficial for all of us. Today, though, this portion goes through the order of Israel according to Yahweh and how to set up for battle, how to set up for the keeping of the temple and the service to the temple. Very important stuff. Isn't it awesome that Yahweh gave us instructions so we didn't have to figure this all out? Could you imagine Israel trying to divide itself up by family and by their own standard? Like a standard is a flag in the military. It's called a guidon, and it represents that group of people, right? So it can be easily found amongst many people. So if you held your standard, your flag, and then all of your people stood behind your flag, it would be easy to determine where Judah was or where the tribe of Benjamin was, right? Because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people in one tribe. Because as we see in the numbering, it's only of males from 20 and above, and it's in the 40 and 50,000 people range, just males age 20 and above that are fit to fight in the war. Okay, so you probably ain't got dudes out there that are 100 years old. I don't know, maybe back then there was still some 100-year-old warriors out there. Isn't that awesome? But there probably was a limit. So whoever was fit to fight from 20 years up, all right, male. So and you'll see as I read. So keep in mind here the magnitude of the numbers of people. We're talking about millions of people when we start adding in the wives, and we start adding in the children, we start adding in the adolescents, we start adding in the elderly. Wow. So it needed some order, right? It needed to be divided into factions or tribes, and then it needed to have their own leaders and their own guidons, their flags, so that it could be used as an instrument in the upcoming wars. All right. But the temple itself also needed to be taken care of. And these people that took care of the temple cannot have blood on their hands. So he set apart a very specific group of people, the Levites and the Korhites, so that they would take care of the temple without blood on their hands, because it had to be kept holy, right? So if you're out there cutting people's heads off, you ain't gonna come back and work in the Holy of Holies. It don't work that way. Okay, so here we go. Lift up the heads of all the congregation of the sons of Israel by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of the names, every male by their heads, from the son of 20 years and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall number them by their armies. And there shall be a man every tribe with you, every one head of his father's house. And then it goes into all the names, and it divides up the tribes. I'm going to skip that, but what I wanted you to understand is that the sons from 20 years upward that are able to go forth to war in Israel. Read through that on your own time and see how many thousands of people it is. It's crazy. So many. Then we're going to skip on here. We're going to go over to chapter 2. It says, And Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, The sons of Israel shall encamp by their father's house, every man with his own standard, according to the ensign. They shall encamp around the tabernacle of congregation afar off. Now, I wanted to point this out to you because we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. There's no way that they were able to camp right next to the tabernacle, because Yahweh said, if any stranger approaches the tabernacle, they will die. So I've seen a lot of pictures that seem to show the tribes right next to the tabernacle, and that's just not possible. You can't fit 500,000 people on the east side of a tabernacle right next to it. It don't work that way, and people would haphazardly run into the tabernacle. Kids would be running around playing, and the next thing you know, they'd be climbing the walls, right? So I need you all to pay attention to this word, afar off. They were not close to the tabernacle. They were afar off. There was a great distance between them and the tabernacle. And then it says in verse 3 of chapter 2, And those who encamp on the east side toward the sun rising are of the standard of Judah's camp. Now, I just wanted to point out that on each side, according to the tribes, they were divided, okay? East, north, west, and south. So there was a tribe set to fight in each corridor or each section of that area. In other words, Yahweh was setting up a defense around his tabernacle. He was setting his mighty warriors on every corner of the tabernacle to be prepared for war. Isn't that awesome? We still do that in the army today. We set up defenses 360 degrees around the command and control center of our operations. Isn't that cool? Yahweh is so awesome. Like, he is the greatest warrior there is. Yeshua is a warrior. You can find it in the scriptures. It calls him a mighty warrior. And he was the leader of the armies of heaven. This guy knew what he was doing. He wasn't a guy, was he? He was our creator, but man, he knew what he was doing, and he was setting up his people for war, just like we do still to this day. All right, so we're going to skip through that, and I want to stop at verse 17, and it says, so chapter 2, verse 17, it says, And the camp of the Levites with the tabernacle of the congregation shall pull up in the middle of the camps. As they encamp, so they shall pull out each man in his place by their standard. On the west side shall be the standard of the camp. Okay, so the Levites, the ones who were designated as holy and priests unto Yahweh, were not counted amongst the warriors. They were not numbered according to the warriors. Instead, they were told to encamp directly around the tabernacle. They were the inner corridor of security, if you will. They were the ones who protected the perimeter of the tabernacle, the inner perimeter, in order that they would be service to the perimeter. In the army today, we still have that. We have all of our like communication specialists, maintenance specialists. We have our technically proficient people that are used for very specific things. They're always on that inner corridor of that security around the command and control center, so that they can service the command and control center and be easily reached, so that things are effective. You see, Yahweh's order of setting up his armies is pretty awesome and can still be seen even in today's armies and how things are done. Now, in chapter 2, verse 33, skip there for me real quick, you're going to see this. you're going to see that it says, but the Levites were not numbered among the sons of Israel as Yahweh commanded Moses. All right, that confirms what I was telling you, that he set them apart. He did not want them numbered with the warriors, as we read in the beginning of chapter 1. In chapter 3, verse 3, it says this: these are the names of Aaron's sons and anointed priests, whose hands he consecrated to act as priests. What did he consecrate? Their hands. He didn't want the ones acting as priests out there cutting off heads, okay? He needed them to have clean hands. And you know where you can see this again? If you read the story of King David, he wanted to build Yahweh a temple in Jerusalem, right? But Yahweh was like, no, man, you can't. Why not? Because David had a lot of blood on his hands. David was a man of war, and so therefore could not build the temple unto Yahweh because he had unclean hands. And I think that's pretty neat, because Yahweh always keeps the same standard. Yahweh's standard doesn't change, even for those he loves dearly. What he declares remains forever. Yep. All right. Now we're going to go through chapter 3, because it begins to number the sons of Aaron and Moses and the Levites. The Levites were the firstborn of the sons of Israel, the firstborn sons of the, so if you go back into Leviticus, it will explain where the Levites came from. The Levites were men who were taken from the sons of Israel, the tribes. They were the firstborn sons that were designated to serve as the Levites, okay? So these were special people. Let's see, they had no inheritance of their own. Yahweh was their inheritance. To serve Yahweh was their inheritance. Now, in verse 13 of chapter 3, it says, for every firstborn is mine from the day I struck every firstborn in the land of Egypt. I have set apart to myself every firstborn in Israel. From men to animal, they are mine. I am Yahweh. So here we see that he was setting apart the firstborn sons. In verse 15 it says, number the sons of Levi by their families, by their father's house. You shall number every male from a son of a month upward. So a son from a month old upward would be numbered among the Levites. So here Yahweh wanted to keep track of the Levites separately from the men of war, because he wanted to ensure there was an order of how to decide who would serve in the temple and what would be their purpose. So here he begins to divide those that were set apart for the service of the temple, of the tabernacle, and he goes down and he describes in each one of these the duties of each tribe and each family from the ones he set apart. Okay, not necessarily each tribe, but each family. So it says of the Gershon is the family of the Libnites. That's verse 21. And the family of the Shemites. These were the families of the Gershonites. And these number of them according to the number of all the males from a son of a month and upward. Even those numbered of them were 7,500. So you can see there was less of them, for one thing, because they were numbering from a month upward. So there was a lot less of them. But they were numbered by their families, and they were all under the Levite section. Now, if you go down through, I think it's pretty cool here, because what you're going to see is the Kohathites. Oh, man. Yeah. The Kohathites were pretty cool. The Kohathites were those of the Elizaphan, the son of Uzziel. And their charge was the ark of the table, the menorah, the altars, and the vessels of the sanctuary with which they minister, the veil in all its service. That was verse 31 of chapter 3. And then you had Eleazar, verse 32. The son of Aaron, the priest, was ruler over the rulers of the Levites. So here Eleazar was put over every other ruler designated by family of the Levites. Eleazar was a very important fellow, and they had oversight and kept the charge of the sanctuary. So let's go to verse 41 of chapter 3. It says, "And you shall take the Levites for me, I am Yahweh, instead of every firstborn among the sons of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites, instead of every firstling among the livestock of the sons of Israel." So here we see a shift. Now the Levites are going to begin to keep their bloodline. So no longer will the sons of Israel donate, or not donate, but give as an offering their firstborn sons to be serviced as a Levite. Now the Levites have developed their own heritage. They have been designated as their own people. So therefore the priests will come from the order of the Levites from now on. That's what Yahweh is establishing there in verse 41. And I think that's important. And then it says, in verse 43, "And all the firstborn males according to the number of names from a son a month and upward, of those numbered of them were 22,273. You can see not very many when you compared the sons of Israel from the year 20 years and older prepared for war. So it was a very small group. Now let's go to chapter 4. And it says this, "And Yahweh spoke to Moses and to Aaron, lift the heads of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi by their families and by their father's house, from a son of 30 years. So see, the sons of Kohath were special. They were set apart for a very special mission. And what was that? From a son of 30 years and upward, even until 50 years old, all that enter upon the service to do work in the tent of meeting. This shall be the service of the sons of Kohath in the tent of the congregation, the Holy of Holies." The Kohath, they got to go into the Holy of Holies. They got to service in the most inner, closest part to Yeshua, right? Isn't that incredible? That would have been such an awesome thing. Then what you're going to see as you go down through chapter 4 is you're going to see that Yahweh begins to describe how to pack up the tabernacle, because the tabernacle moved with Israel. Every time Israel moved, as they defeated their enemies and drove out their enemies, they would move around, and you will see that there was an order on how to pack up the tent to move it around. It's pretty cool, and I invite you to read it for yourself and see how it works. So that ends the topic of Numbers. I invite you to check it out. All right, thank you. I love you all, and I'll be right back with another video.